All right, welcome to a live edition of the Alec Lewis Show. We've done a couple of these through the time of recording this podcast. If you're listening on audio after the fact, this is episode 73 of the Alec Lewis Show. Just doing draft talk tonight. I didn't take questions for the podcast episode earlier this week, so I thought, might as well hop in, have you guys ask some Vikings questions. Please throw any Vikings draft questions, any questions all into the chat. As always, the show, as you can see in the right-hand corner, is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area. Again, if you're new here, throw those questions in the chat. Draft questions. The background, I want to leave the sun outside. The weather's getting good. It's good vibes around the Minneapolis area, and it's Masters weekend, which is always one of my favorites. If you're asking me in the chat who I think is going to win the Masters, you're probably going to get Colin Morikawa as the answer. But we're going to talk Vikings draft here. Like I said, throw questions in the chat. I took some on Twitter before we got going so that I'd have a jumping off point. And then if you throw the questions in the chat, I will get to as many of them as I can. First question comes from a guy who listens and watches named Steven Turner. He asked me earlier today, Steven, does the team view Michael Juergens, who was a 7th-round pick last year, as the future center or guard? Curious if that would make Gray Zabel more attractive. So we'll just start here because I think it's a very good jumping off point. Michael Juergens, like I said, Wake Forest product, was drafted last year in the 7th round, had really, really good PFF grades coming in. And I would say last preseason didn't go spectacularly, especially in the preseason games in terms of what he did on the field. But I do know that the team does want to give him ample opportunity both at guard and center. And so that's kind of my response. Like, he's a versatile player in Michael Juergens. That's who we're speaking about now. And I think a guy like Gray Zabel, who's a prospect out of North Dakota State, is a very popular mock draft player for the Vikings. Like, Gray Zabel is also viewed as a guy who can play on the interior of the offensive line. He can play center. And so I don't think having Michael Juergens, because Michael Juergens is a 7th-round pick, will ever prevent you from drafting a guy you think can be an elite interior player. And that's what the Vikings would be saying by drafting Gray Zabel in the 1st round. So, no, to answer Steven's question, I guess first off, do I think the Vikings view Michael Juergens solely as the future center? No, I think he's more of a versatile player who could fit in at some point, either at guard or at center, depending on what he shows. And like I said, I think he's going to get an opportunity at both. And then as far as Gray Zabel, I mean, I've said it. I think the team likes him. Again, North Dakota State player, has a wrestling background, has played a lot of left tackle at North Dakota State, but has also played everywhere. And he could slide in, be a left guard, potentially a future center. So do think he's an option for sure. We'll have more on him throughout the show because Gray Zabel was a popular talker, but that was a nice jumping off point. Next question comes from Purple Persuasion, who a lot of you guys probably know from social media. They ask, is there a situation where you could see the Vikings trading up in the 1st round or from 97 into the 2nd using future draft capital? Like, I'll never say never about trades in the draft or about anything that can happen in the draft because you just never do truly know. But for me, the odds that the Vikings first trade up from 24 would be I don't have high odds on that one. And then as far as 97, I mean, again, never say never. And especially if the Vikings were to trade around, you could definitely see them doing it in a pick swap type of format where you've seen Kwesi Adofo-Mensah frequently in the past, where he trades, a low 3rd for a high 4th, certain aspects and moving around from a trade perspective that I think I could see them do. But just to kind of answer the question, trading up with how much I know this team wants to replenish some of the draft capital that they obviously traded away last year, specifically with the Dallas Turner acquisition and trade. Trading up in this one for just a specific guy that this team pinpoints. I just, for me, just never say never. I'll take a couple questions for the chat and then hop right back into some questions that were asked on social media. If you're new here and watch on YouTube, appreciate you being here. Always enjoy the Q&A sessions that we have. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit that subscribe button. It helps us out. But let's see here. Let's see. Him Towel asked, why did Meat Sauce ban you from the Masters bet? That's a great question. For those who don't know, on KFAN, they do a Masters bet on the power trip. I've wanted to hop in. I talked to Sauce about it. It seemed like that was a possibility, and then it never happened. So I'm going to have to talk to Sauce about that because it's I wanted to be in the Masters bet. It was something that I valued, that was important to me, and we're not in it. But I'm still going to watch, and I'm going to be rooting, and I may or may not have side money to dish out. Next question, let's see. Victor Fuiza says they're a big fan from Brazil, which I really appreciate you tuning in and asking questions all the way from Brazil. That's pretty freaking cool. Do you think Isaiah Rodgers will be the CB2? What do you expect about Mekhi Blackmon? So if you did not know or you did not see it, at the NFL owners meetings, Kevin O'Connell obviously spoke, on, I believe it was Tuesday morning of that week in Palm Beach, and he spoke glowingly about Isaiah Rodgers and really the evaluation that Brian Flores had on Isaiah Rodgers, which isn't a surprise. It sounded like Isaiah Rodgers was the first player that the Vikings signed through that free agency period, and I think a lot of people were like, what? Who is this guy? A backup corner from Philadelphia, guy who had played in Indianapolis. Really, this is the first guy. And then obviously there was a flood of signings after that. You guys know that if you're tuning in to this show. But Kevin O'Connell talked in West Palm Beach about how high of an evaluation of a belief Brian Flores had in Isaiah Rodgers. And I do think, the question was whether or not Isaiah Rodgers will be CB2. I think he's going to get a pretty stellar opportunity to be that player. He's a shorter in stature guy, but it just sounds like they have a lot of belief in his toughness, in his ball production on the field, in his competitiveness. And so he adds to, you mentioned Mekhi Blackmon, Victor, he adds to a really competitive young cornerback group. Mekhi Blackmon is coming off torn ACL. Sounds like he's going to be ready to rock when things get going. And he's a very competitive, very sharp guy, Mekhi Blackmon, to where I think he will vie and push. And it'll be great to see him back healthy because I do know last year he was going to have an opportunity to play considerable amount of time. And so, I just can't wait to see the way that cornerback group really shakes out. You're talking Jeff Okudah, who, like anybody who follows this stuff, you look at the PFF grades, I think people see the red with Jeff Okudah and it throws them off. But I don't know if Jeff Okudah has had a coach who's going to make sure to try to maximize him and put him in the right position, which is probably going to be on the boundary, the short side of the field, where Jeff Okudah can be physical and he can run with guys. So and then potentially if they were to add at cornerback in this draft, infusing things with Byron Murphy Jr. and Dwight McGlothern, who I really like as an undrafted free agent signing from last year. I just think, just like last year, it's going to be really fun to watch that cornerback room come together. I like the youth. I like the fact that they're going to have guys who are just less tread on the tires, who can probably switch up and play man coverage a little bit more. I'll never forget that late season Packers game this past season between the Vikings and the Packers, where the Vikings played, I think, 50% man coverage in that game. And it was a total change up that Matt LaFleur said after the game he did not expect. And that was it was very much a one-off. The Vikings played some two-man earlier in the season against the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers in that game in London. But to have more youth and guys who could potentially, play more man coverage, do I think it's going to become the base of what they do? No, because I think a lot of us think, or I can just speak for myself, like when Brian Flores got the job, you think man coverage, press man. But I think Brian Flores in a way has evolved to where they have utilized a ton of different zone coverages, cover two, some palm stuff, some quarters coverage, some different type strategies to where they value cornerbacks who are not just long and compressed, but guys who have vision to play on the quarterback, who have instincts to break on the ball. And I think like that's where you saw Mekhi Blackman's selection make sense. He was a shorter in stature guy who the Vikings felt like had the instincts and the aptitude to fit their system. Even Kyrie Jackson last year, rest his soul, like he was a longer guy, a really athletic guy who could run, but he was instinctual, and that's what they liked about him. So I appreciate the question. Hope that got to some of it, Victor. Will Spindall asks in the chat, is a signing of Asante Samuel Jr. or Jack Jones more likely? Man, like what I would say is I think there are people internally who like both of those guys. And we'll see like in terms of the competition for both. Right now, Asante Samuel Jr. doesn't have an agent, so it's pretty hard to pay. I know the rumors that have been out there. It's a fun story. Like I hope that comes to fruition from the story aspects and being able to track down the person who told Purple Daily that they saw him at the bar. That would be pretty entertaining. And then Jack Jones, for the people who don't know, is a Raiders cornerback. He's navigated a lot of stuff, a lot of off-field stuff, but and he's very much like a boomer bust guy. I love some of the highlights of his interceptions where it's one-handed, taken to the house, and there are times where I do think he really would fit what Brian Flores wants to do if he is, even though he is also a shorter in stature guy. So I don't know if I would say either one of those is more likely than the other. Neither one of those would surprise me at all. But I do think I want to see how this draft plays out in terms of positionally where the Vikings attack to then probably have a better feel of the probability of the Vikings bringing in another corner like that. I hope that makes sense. William Simpson asks, is there any veracity to Jordan Addison trade prior to the draft for draft capital? I have not heard anything to substantiate any of that. So that's just what I'll say there. We'll take a quick second. If you're here, we got like, I'm saying 50 plus people watching on YouTube. Really, really appreciate that. Toss questions in the chat. I'm just running down. I'll move around from one spot to another in terms of the chat. So just toss questions in. Really appreciate that. If you're new and you're finding this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you don't know me, I cover the Vikings for The Athletic on a day-to-day basis. I've done this show now for less than a year. Really enjoy getting to speak directly to you guys. It's one of the most fun parts of the job. The passion of this fan base, I never take for granted. We'll keep rolling. Kit Fisto's dental plan. What a name that is. On corners. Any chance Stephon Gilmore ends up returning? Just kind of like the conversation before with Asante Samuel Jr. and Jack Jones. Like, I just want to see how the draft plays out before having a better feel in terms of the probability that would be possible. I know the Vikings love Stephon Gilmore. The locker room loved what he brought to the table. Obviously an older guy who fits more in zone, but he's competitive at the catch point. He is reliable. It would probably be dependent on how much Stephon wants to keep playing, what the price tag on that would look like. I'm not sure if I'd say I'd bet on that at this point, but kind of like a lot of these answers, I just can't rule it out until I see more of kind of how the draft works out. And then, because the draft playing out would then allow the Vikings to sign players who wouldn't apply to the comp pick formula. And if you've read a lot of my writing going back to pre-free agency, and if you've followed, the podcast since free agency, the Vikings have been very mindful with their comp pick formula and ensuring that they can generate more draft picks for 2026, because They obviously only have 4 at the moment. Even if they trade back and can generate 6 or 7 or what have you, like, I don't think they're just going to trade back so they can have 10 picks just to have 10 picks. No, at this point, it is about value and generating impact. So here we go. Just a Dude asks, how far back from 24 is too far to trade back? I mean, that's a question I would ask you guys. Like, if the Vikings were to trade back on the night of April 24th, and it is going from 24 to 33, are you okay with that? If they get a really early round third, would you be okay with that? And still get a player like interior offensive lineman Donovan Jackson. Like, would you be okay with that? I mean, that feels like, 40, you're dropping 16 spots. That feels like way too far for me, probably, to be palatable in terms of trading back. But I'd say early second round would probably be sensible and probably on the low end of what's possible. So, I don't know, like 6 spots, you still get a first round pick with the 5th-year option, potentially can get a real difference maker. Even 9 spots back to 33, to me, you could probably still get a difference maker. Do I think the Vikings are going to end up with in this draft? And that's a hard question for me to answer. But if you could end up with 3 of them, I think you'd feel very, very good about that, considering where they're entering this draft with. Next question comes from Sorn. If Omarion Hampton somehow falls, is that just a no-brainer? I mean, for the folks who don't know, that's North Carolina running back Omarion Hampton. First of all, I don't think he's going to fall and get to 24. I just don't, from just talking to people and just viewing the landscape. That would surprise me. But I love the guy. I've been on record. Like, people have asked me on the podcast, and I always say, I'm not a draft analyst. I'm not an expert. I haven't been watching film for 10 years and writing detailed scouting reports the way Dane Brugler has at The Athletic. And if you missed it, please go check out The Beast over at The Athletic, because it's a hell of a product that Dane puts out. But I love Omarion Hampton. He's physical, he's big, he can catch, he's an every down back. I just would say right now, having re-signed Aaron Jones, having added Jordan Mason, who I've been talking to people about over this past week, because he's just a fascinating player to me, and a player who has had a fascinating arc. I just don't, running back right now in the first round, I would just cross that one off. I don't know what the odds makers would say, but that just feels like a major long shot, like the Kentucky Derby horse, that you're like, man, I just wouldn't go there. Dylan Dotson asks, I don't think linebacker is being talked about enough. Do you find that position to be in need? I mean, look, I really don't. Comparatively, you have Blake Cashman, who is an every down guy. You guys all know, because you're here and you watched it last year. He was great in coverage. He was underratedly good as a pass rusher. He is physical. I think the only question with him is durability, but he proved last year he could be pretty dang durable. Ivan Pace Jr. is not as much the every down guy. But they signed Eric Wilson for a reason. Not only is he going to provide special teams help, but he can also fill in spurts, which you guys know, having seen him here, but also, like, one of the refrains I heard, or the comments I heard pretty quickly after Eric Wilson signed from Green Bay folks was like, I mean, man, like, kind of missed this guy who was pretty solid as a fill-in. So I don't know if linebacker is just a major need. I'd also say this: the success that the Vikings had in the UDFA portion with Ivan Pace Jr. would make me think that you have the same staff with Brian Flores, you have the same linebackers coach with Mike Saravo, the same people involved, with Mike Pettin and others, to where they could probably, an undersized guy, a guy who makes sense at that position. I'd have confidence that they could find a UDFA that could maybe fill that spot. I'm going to segue here because I thought it was a great question. Someone asked me early today on social media, should we expect even more UDFA signings than the last 2 seasons? And there have been a lot of them. I mean, you guys know last year, Bo Richter made the team. Taki Taamani made the team. Ivan Pace Jr. was not last year, but he made the team. Gabriel Murphy at edge rusher, he made the team. So they've been very active with the UDFA signings. Do I expect them to be more active? I mean, maybe. Like, it does sound like talking to people, and this is both people internally as well as agents who have players who could probably fall into that UDFA portion, that the Vikings are going to be pretty proactive in trying to ensure that they can acquire players in that realm. And again, when you've had the success they've had doing that, and it comes with the surplus that avenue does come with, it'd be freaking hard not to want to pour as many resources and as much time there. And I thought dovetailing from that was a great question. This came from a guy, Mac, on social media. He said, is the Vikings' ability in the UDFA portion viewed as luck, or do they treat it with more importance than other teams? And like, it was a great question because it made me think. Do I think it's luck that they've had the success they've had in the UDFA portion? Absolutely not. Do I think they treat it with more importance than other teams? I don't know if I would say that. For me, I'd attribute the success that they've had in the UDFA portion to a couple things. I mean, one, it's just stellar relationships with agents who are placing their player in the best position that they want their player to be successful. Like, I had multiple conversations in Indianapolis where I had agents telling me, like, man, we really want to get this guy to Minnesota. Like, we really, and like, it is not for me to vouch for Minnesota. That's not the job. The job is to be very objective, but all I can do is just tell you what I've heard from a lot of these agents. And so I know, talking to, I mean, again, agents who have had players like Ivan Pace in the UDFA portion in the past, but also agents who have players who could probably fall in the UDFA portion this time around, that the Vikings, I mean, they've just placed themselves as a premier spot in the eyes of a lot of agents. And again, even the players. I mean, these players come into Minnesota and they go to the TCO Performance Center, where you guys have probably been for training camp or what have you, or where I go to work every day. And it is impressive as heck in terms of a facility. You walk through that weight room, you meet those people, you hear what other players say about the culture. It's a pretty enticing spot. And UDFAs are pretty, I mean, it's a recruitment type of situation similar to college. So I don't think it's luck, and I'm not sure the Vikings place more importance on it. I just think they have a lot to sell right now. And agents and players are very bought in with the chance that signing in Minnesota gives them a very good chance of being successful, which is it's a testament to the culture. I mean, Kevin O'Connell has built, and these players have helped build, and the other, staffers have structured over the time that they've been here. But I thought those were great questions. And I think the UDFA portion is an important conversation because you've got guys really contributing from that player acquisition avenue. Let's see here. Travis Ingwerson says, I'd like to trade back, stay in the first round, and get a 5th or 6th round pick and get a safety. What I would say, Travis, is if you're trading back, I mean, depending on how many spots it is, and I wrote a historical kind of looking at the last 5 years, teams that trade back in the 20s in the first round, if you trade back 6 spots, let's just say, and you're now picking 30th because you traded with the Buffalo Bills, you could probably get a 4th rounder, maybe a really late 3rd, something of the sort. I do think, to your point, Travis, you're talking about getting a safety. I mean, it's a very interesting position in this draft that I would say, if you're asking me right now, if the Vikings get through this draft, and I know they only have 4 picks right now, but if they get through this draft and they haven't picked a safety, I'd be mildly surprised. Like, I don't say that with a ton of intel. I would just say that it feels like there are a couple of interesting safeties up top for sure. Talking first round type talents in Nicky Manwari and Malachi Starks. But then there's a lot of intriguing middle of the round type safeties. And if you look at like studies that have been done on where it is probably best to pick certain positions, I mean, one of the spots for safety is like round 3, round 4, and round 5. So that just, it wouldn't surprise me if they were to draft a guy there after taking trenches kind of up top. But I mean, again, they're just interesting guys. I mentioned Nicky Manwari and Malachi Starks at the top in the first round. I mean, but in the mid rounds, you've got guys like Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. He's a captain. I was talking to a scout earlier this morning about him, and he just sounds like a very instinctual, very solid player, not the most athletic, elite traits, blow your explosiveness metric out of the water, but just a really solid player. You've got guys like Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State coming off a torn ACL, flies downhill as a tackler, maybe some questions in coverage. I don't know if he'll be ready for the season, but he's an interesting guy. You've got a middle of the round safety like Andrew Makuba, who I love the tape of. I just have to say it, from Texas. He transferred from Clemson. Very small guy. Is he too small to play? You know, I think you get different answers on that with people inside the NFL, but this guy, he flies downhill as well. He's a ball hawking player. And I just, you know, Brian Flores has made it work with guys of different sizes and different statures who have kind of the mental makeup and the aptitude that can fit his system and are versatile. So, I mean, for me, like, to Travis's point of trading back, and then potentially finding a safety in the mid rounds. Like I'm on board with that idea, for sure. Let's see what else we got. KP Foul asks, if you like 3 guys at 24 and feel you can get one 5 spots later and then trade down, if not, stick and get your guy. He's probably responding to my question posed to you guys of what you think about the trade down. Like I'm just curious. And obviously I wrote earlier this week, like thinking back to 2022, if you can stomach it, trading down from 12 to 32 is probably way too far to trade down. If you're going to do that, you probably got to recoup more than the Vikings did. And talking to people internally, I think they understand that at this point. But yeah, I mean, it will be really interesting and I think that's why, you know, the speculation and the doing this type of thing where we're talking through options and potential routes that this thing could go, it's going to be really tough to peg until draft night comes and it's April 24th, and the number 24 pick comes across and you see which guys are available. Like if there are certain players that I know this team loves internally and they're there at 24, it's going to probably be very difficult to trade down, even though you know what that could present you. So, I mean, really, I think, you know, it's often like, I used to say this all the time when I cover baseball with trades. It's like, why wouldn't they trade this guy? Well, you have to know what the trade packages were before you would be able to understand why the team made the trade or why they didn't. So I think you have to have all the information of which players are available, which guys the Vikings like, which sometimes we know or I'll know, and sometimes you don't know as much. And then just what the offers are from a trade perspective. Let's see. Next couple questions. Soren asked, you're going to be at the draft party at the bank. He's probably talking about the U.S. Bank draft party. I don't think I'm going to be there. I thought about it last year to gauge people's thoughts on the quarterback before the draft, but spent a lot of the time on that day prepping, calling coaches, obviously talking to agents, trying to get a feel, and then usually end up at TCO Performance where Kwesi Adofo-Mensah will usually talk, and Kevin O'Connell later that night. So I don't know. If I hop over there, Soren, look for me. I'm the nerdy guy with the glasses. Travis Ingwerson asks, do you see an extension for Van Ginkel on the horizon? Wouldn't surprise me at all. As you guys know, and I've written this and said it on podcasts, like Van Ginkel's represented by Drew Rosenhaus. The Vikings have a phenomenal relationship with Drew Rosenhaus. They represent a lot of his players. He is Christian Darisaw's agent and negotiated the extension that Christian Darrisaw did last season. or last offseason, excuse me. So just wouldn't surprise me. And I think, once we get through the draft, probably we'll be having a lot of those conversations of the players that are worthy of extensions. Like I think, we'll talk about Josh Metellus. Potentially talk about Josh Oliver. I got to go through the list. Brian O'Neill's contract presents an interesting kind of circumstance. So there's probably a lot of conversation to be had on the extension front. But with the way Andrew Van Ginkel played last year was absolutely ridiculous, incredibly impressive. He is such a quiet guy. It always blows me away. But I think that's a good question. Let's see. Well, next question. Junk Buster asks, would you be opposed to getting a tackle at 24? I assume he's talking about an offensive tackle. I don't know if what I would say is I like the idea of taking that position in the first round, but the Vikings obviously have Christian Darrisaw, who will be coming back from the torn ACL, who's an absolute stud. And then Brian O'Neill on the other side has been rock solid. Kevin O'Connell was raving about him again in Palm Beach. And what I would say to that question is, would I be surprised if the Vikings took an interior player who had tackle flexibility and versatility? Not at all. Like, who's that type of guy? I think a Kelvin Banks from Texas is probably that type of player. I think a Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. He's more of a left guard, but he slid out to left tackle late in the season for Ohio State and did not really sink. Zabel, who you're mentioning in the chat, like he played left tackle a ton in college and has the athletic traits maybe to hold up there. So, I think for me, like that's where Gray Zabel is just a fascinating player because he could probably slide in and be an immediate left guard. A lot of prospect evaluators think he could be a potential center. And we know with Ryan Kelly's injury history, like I've been on record both on the podcast and in writing that for me, like durability is going to be just absolutely essential for this entire season in terms of 2025. And finding a guy or ensuring that you have depth specifically for center where Ryan Kelly has navigated the injuries that he's navigated. Hopefully he stays healthy the whole year. That'd be phenomenal. It'd be great to watch. He's an incredibly impressive player, and I'd love kind of just watching him be healthy for the whole year. But, to bet on that would probably be a lofty bet. So having depth for the center position, to me, is just essential. And right now, like, yes, do they believe in potentially what Michael Juergens could be? I think so. Do they believe in could Blake Brandel potentially play center? I think that's a possibility, but how much confidence as a fan, I'd ask it to you, would you guys have if Blake Brandel is your center in a meaningful game? And it'd be pretty tough place to be. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I appreciate it, Junk Buster, and that's a heck of a name too. Robert Misk off the safety conversation says Eman Wari is the 5th or 6th best safety in the draft, which is a very interesting comment. What I would say is Nick Eman, for those who don't know, I assume if you're tuning in, you probably have a good feel of who this guy is because he played safety at South Carolina. He is like 6'3", 220, athletic traits that are mirroring of DK Metcalf for a safety, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Like you look at any of his athletic metrics, his vertical jump, they are off the charts from a safety perspective. Just absolutely incredible. And it's hard for anybody not to look at those numbers and dream of what he could be. But you have very diverse thoughts from an evaluation perspective of, okay, you have all these athletic traits. You have such a fine clay to mold, but can this guy, is he as effective on the field as his traits would suggest? And that's where, I've watched a little of the tape and I say it all the time, and it's probably should be my tagline at this point, but like, I'm not an elite safety prospect evaluation mind, but I do look a lot for how quick does a guy react on the field, because I know that's what the Vikings look for, and how much does his size match what you're seeing on tape. And for me with Eman Wari, there are times where he's lined up against a receiver in the slot. I think you can see where his size really does show up. But then there are times where he's coming down from the roof of coverage and it's just slow. The angles aren't phenomenal. And so, like the comment there of Eman Wari is the 5th or 6th best safety in the draft, you'd get a lot of differing opinions on that. I'm not going to shoo the opinion away because, again, like the instincts are very important. I know for the Vikings and for me as I evaluate it, because that is what they value. So the safety class is very interesting, and safety is a tough evaluation in general. Like I've talked to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah about the difficulty of that position. It's just you're dealing with a lot. They're reading a lot in their system. There's a lot of communication. Like there's just a lot to sort through. So it's interesting. Duke the God asks, why do we not talk about Walter Rouse from Oklahoma? Could be our starting guard. I would never rule that out. And I will say that for a long time now, I mean, going back to last training camp, when I do think Walter Rouse got a couple reps at guard, I have heard that the Vikings would like to just see him at guard. He is probably less of the mobile athletic type in terms of playing on the interior there, but he could probably create a pretty good vertical push. So I would expect, like I would expect this summer and this fall to see Walter Rouse get snaps at guard, and how he looks is going to be very interesting to me. But why do we not talk about him starting there? I mean, I think it's because you have a guy in Walter Rouse again, and I will say this about Walter Rouse, as impressive of a dude as you're going to find in that locker room, like reminds me a lot of Cam Bynum, just in the like worldly nature, the awareness, the willingness to like care and be for people and educate people on the game. Like it's shining in that regard. And so I always, you talk to people in the league, you always hear like from smart people. For me, it's like you bet on people, not as much the player. Like you bet on the person and what they can become. So I never say never about Walter Rouse with any aspect, but I mean, being a 5th round pick, to expect him to be just an elite guard right off the bat, having never played a snap. I mean, like the Vikings have, over the past few years since I've covered this team, they have made bets on the interior of the offensive line. I think this offseason thus far has proven that like they're no longer willing to just roll the dice at these spots. They want to have as much certainty as possible. So that's what I'd say to that response. Let's see. Next question comes from Junkbuster. What are the chances Harrison Smith comes back for another year after 2025? If not, would you like to have us go get a stud like Malachi Starks or a stud in free agency? I mean, at this point with Harrison Smith, to rule anything out on my end would be foolish. The guy is like Gumby. He doesn't seem to age. He freaking loves playing for Brian Flores. And I mean, he's been very open with a lot of different people about there is no replicating what it is like to play on Sunday. So, I mean, Harrison Smith coming back for another year would be wild. I would never rule it out. But that I do think the safety spot is one in this draft. Like I said earlier, if you've been listening to this, the entire live stream, like I'd be mildly surprised if we get through the 2025 NFL draft and the Vikings haven't added a safety at any point. I talked about Eman Wari from South Carolina in depth. Malachi Starks is another interesting player who's more of the first round type. And again, I was kicking around safeties with a personnel person in the AFC this morning. And they like Starks. Like they were pretty open about it. He's a guy who's much more of the like instinctive, play from the top, play the post, read things out, read coverages out. I mean, it would be wild if the Vikings took another safety from Georgia, but I just think, just because the guy plays the same uniform, it's a totally different player. I've watched, because I love college football, like he got beat in the slot and man coverage a bunch. So that would probably be a question, but I could see the Vikings liking Starks. I don't know that for certain. I haven't talked to anybody internally about that. But the other question I would ask Malachi Starks is he going to be there at 24? And I think you could ask that question about Nicky Manwari. You could ask that question about Gray Zabel. You could probably ask that question about Derek Harmon from Oregon, the interior defensive lineman, which we haven't talked a lot about through this entire show. So, I mean, again, that's where when you talk about the trade back and you talk about what they're going to do at 24, I mean, it's really hard without seeing the board. And I think there is a possibility that a lot of these guys that the Vikings could be off the board, which would make you do some different things and ask some different questions. Thorne says, I'm hoping for a trade down to the late first, early second, and grabbing Donovan Jackson. I mean, Donovan Jackson, for those who don't know, played left guard to start the season this past year at Ohio State, transitioned out to left tackle. I talked to Brandon Thorne, who evaluates offensive linemen, on the podcast earlier this week, and you talked to me about him, and he's not there aren't a ton of Donovan Jackson traits that I think just blow people out of the water. But I watched the tape of an early season game against Oregon and against Derek Harmon, who is another first-round caliber prospect, and he was solid. He read stunts. He seemed like the physicality was enough. The athleticism was enough. Donovan Jackson's probably a guy who could step in and play left guard from the get-go for the Vikings. And I mean, if you were to trade down and get a guy like that, then you pick up another dart to throw on a potential later round safety, on a potential later round receiver. Like it just gives you more versatility. But again, like I think I love the idea of the trade down and adding more darts to throw. But if there is a player at 24 that you are very convicted on, it's never to say that it's 100% going to work out, but I would say I would just pick the player at 24. And what I know about the way I think they want to operate is that I wouldn't be shocked if they just pick the player at 24, but they do need more darts. It's just the truth. Kit Fisto's dental plan asks Siobhan Ravel thoughts. Siobhan Ravel, cornerback from ECU, pretty athletic guy, longer player. I think a lot of people want him to be the Quinyon Mitchell of last year for this year. So I would say Revel, I will tell you, I went back and watched the film 2 nights ago of ECU's game against Michigan in 2023 with JJ McCarthy as the quarterback, which was just fun to go watch JJ film because you kind of any reminder of just the consistency and the pro system that he was in, I think it's always a good refresher for me and for a lot of people. But Ravel, the injury history, he's coming off the torn ACL. That's tough. There are times where I'm not sure if he's as much of an instinctive player as he just kind of guesses right. I mean, I would say he has the competitiveness and the fire. You see that pretty clearly on film that I think Brian Flores would really like. But the thing for me with him, and even someone asked me on social media about Azare Thomas from Florida State, who's another lanky guy, supposed to be a really good dude from Florida State, is if these players are more of the top 40, top 60 type, 40 to 60 range, the Vikings, to me, Revel at 24 would just be too rich. And so to me, that would only make sense if they were to trade back probably further than would probably be pretty palatable. So that's what I'd say about Revel. But I need to see more film on him. And he's a guy I'll ask. Our guest for tomorrow's episode, Dane Brugler, is going to hop on the show with me. I'll ask him about Revel tomorrow because he's an interesting player, and Dane wrote a feature on him. Jason A said first round safety is a bad idea. I mean, you don't have to look too far to see the Vikings having tried that and the bad idea show up. But I mean, there's a first round safety in that same draft, Kyle Hamilton, who was a stud. I will say most of the analysis would tell you that drafting a safety in the first round, just not the most optimal team building approach, just from the surplus. I'd also say second round, it's a little dicey, but I wouldn't be, if they were to trade back and they were pick up a really early third round pick or something like that, and they were to draft a player like Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, who was a captain, who was instinctive, I think I'd be okay with that. get to a couple more of these questions. We've gone about 40 plus minutes. Been a blast for me. I'm going to podcast this episode, and I do all of those. If you're watching on YouTube and you're new, hit that subscribe button. It helps us out. We're going to do more of these in the lead up to the draft and then over the summer and into training camp. Brett Howe asks, what do you think of any chance of a wide receiver early? Have you looked at Jaden Higgins at all? Really like him. I mean, the wide receiver early conversation to me is pretty fascinating. I flew back from West Palm Beach on the same flight as a couple of the Vikings beat writers, and some of them are very passionate about that idea, one of which made a podcast called Purple Insider. And so what I would say is, I mean, it's interesting. To me, I look at the wide receiver situation. I don't need to talk about the guy who wears number 18. Jordan Addison, I mean, is a special player. Like I know you guys don't overlook this, but like I go back sometimes and I watch the film and I'm like, his separation ability is just, and his ability to move around the formation, it's very impressive. Now, will he potentially be suspended early in the season? Possibly. But are you drafting a guy in the first round because a guy might miss 3 games when the same guy missed 3 games last year early in the season because of an ankle injury? And the Vikings still won those games. I believe beat the Texans over that span and beat the 49ers over that span. Like Jalen Naylor proved last year that he can step into that role and separate. And so I just don't think the Vikings are going to just take a first-round pick on a wide receiver because Jordan Addison might miss a few games. I also still think that Addison we'll see long-term. I mean, obviously, with his production, he's going to covet a lot of money whenever the extension conversations or what have you happen. I mean, for me, the wide receiver spot is most evident thinking about the future with Jalen Naylor. I mean, Jalen Naylor is on the final year of his rookie deal. I think if he produces at a comparable level to what he did last year, he's going to get paid a pretty hefty amount in free agency next season. So you'd probably like a wide receiver 3 more than needing to talk about a guy to replace Jordan Addison. And if you're talking about a wide receiver 3 in the first round, I mean, you're really talking about kind of it's kind of like the Lions having everything fixed so we can just do Jahmyr Gibbs. And I just feel like the Vikings still need youth in the trenches and potentially at a spot like cornerback or safety more than they do that spot. I mean, I'll say, like, I love Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, and everything you hear about that guy would make you think that the Vikings, would really like what he would bring to the table. But again, it's just so rich. Like someone asked me on social media about Luther Burden. I went to Mizzou for college. I've watched Luther Burden play a lot of snaps in his college career. With the ball in his hands, he is about as dynamic as you're going to find, and I really would not be surprised if he's just a stud in the NFL. But I think there are questions to be asked in a lot of regards with him. One of which on the field is the route running, is kind of the effort stuff. So I'm not totally sold there. Let's see. Other questions. Dylan Dotson said, Alec, do you have any ties to Purple Daily? I think you'd really jive with those guys. I don't have any ties other than I love seeing Judd and Phil out at TCO Performance Center when I do. And I mean, it's just like a lot of people in this market. Really good dudes. They care about what they do. They want to do it the right way. And it's not just this market from a football perspective. Like I mean, the baseball beat writers in this town I've known since I covered baseball, and they really care. And I mean, Russo and the intensity he gives hockey, and Joe Smith over The Athletic, and not just The Athletic folks, but I mean, there's the media in this town. You guys listen to this who care about the other sports are spoiled. I can tell you that. Let's see. Kit Fisto's dental plan. No one is talking about edge for the Vikes. Could they add to their strength? For me, that's probably a UDFA type of aspect. I mean, Dallas Turner is warranting of opportunity. And Like, I mean, with Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel already on the field and potentially Dallas Turner upping his snap count, there's just not a lot of room there to develop for guys to develop. Let's see. Robert Miss, seems obvious they like Harmon, but has there been any rumbles about Walter Nolan? So it's a great question, Robert. I appreciate you asking this. Walter Nolan, I imagine you guys know, interior of the defensive line from Ole Miss. Interesting prospect. You turn on the tape of that guy, and there are some times where he plays so violently and productively that it's a fun watch. Like I've said on the show, I think that some of my favorite prospects to watch in this entire class on tape, where you feel you want to stand up, you're like, that guy's a beast. Omarion Hampton from North Carolina, the running back. Walter Nolan is one of those guys for me. The thing about Walter Nolan, I think there are questions, from like a diagnosing plays. I think there are questions about the consistency of the effort, game to game, snap to snap. There are questions probably in terms of how he can hold up against the run. The Vikings are in an interesting spot with how they want to transition, I think, from like a front perspective. Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave are more of like the one gapping type players, but they're also big enough to be able to anchor against the run. I think with Nolan, there's probably a little more questions there in terms of that aspect of the game than there would be a Derek Harmon. And then again, like I said, there's the evaluation is the tape, specifically from those on the outside, but there's the football character stuff. There's just a lot of the evaluation that the team internally will have that it's harder to get on the outside. Ignacio has asked a ton of questions. I haven't gotten any of them. Any important Vikings players that can be traded for draft capital? I don't really think a ton at this point really come to mind. I got to tell you, it doesn't take much looking or pursuit to find out how much money the Vikings are spending on this current roster. It is almost mind-blowing. And again, I was having this conversation with somebody this morning about this, to where I don't think there's any obvious players that you could trade for draft capital, with the amount that they're going to want to win, with how much they're paying this roster. That's just kind of it's a pretty clear declaration when you're spending more than anybody else in cash on a roster for this season. You probably need to be kind of close to all in with it. Duke the God, would you take Benjamin Morrison in the second if the Vikings can trade back and get picks? Man corner with high upside. Yeah, Morrison, I like his tape. Notre Dame corner. The thing with him is just the injury risk. I believe he's had 2 hip surgeries. When he's out there, he's fluid and he's competitive as heck. He's a little smaller, but I don't think that would prevent the Vikings from being interested. You said, would you take Benjamin Morrison in the second if you can trade back and get picks? That's really, to me, again, that's the question with a guy like Siobhan Revel, with a guy like Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State. Like, those are 40-ish range, 50 range guys. They'll probably fall in the 40 to 60 range. Finding picks in that segment of the draft, to me, is going to be pretty difficult unless they trade back further than I think a lot of people would probably be okay with. So it's just they're worthwhile players to talk about, but it's just it's pretty interesting. We've gone about 53 minutes. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, helps us out. Stay tuned. We'll have like I said, I'm gonna have Dane Brugler on the show Thursday, so stay locked in for that. Any last questions, toss them in the chat, and then we'll hop out of here. I wanted to get out to watch Luka play the Lakers, then wanted to do this before the Masters starts, and I'm totally locked in. Chunk Buster asked, do you think Omarion Hampton is worthy of his hype right now? There's serious talks of people liking him more than Ashton Genty. I don't know about more than Ashton Genty. That is a little rich for me. That guy's tape is laughable. You put it on, and it's just like, how is he bouncing off 700 guys? How is he still running? And he's he can do everything. But Omarion Hampton, I mean, I said it, he's one of my favorite guys to watch on film in this entire draft. He's a 3-down guy. I mean, he's run out of the shotgun. He's run gas schemes. I think he has the vision to run some of the zone scheme stuff. So I just love that guy. I don't know how early he'll go, but I'm pretty fascinated by it. All righty. That'll do it for an episode of the Alec Lewis Show, a live episode, episode 73. We're always presented by First Resource Bank. Check them out. If you're here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Any questions that I didn't get to, throw them in the comments section. I'll be looking at those, or toss them over to me on social media, and we'll get them in the forthcoming days. I actually am going to have a mock draft based on Dane Brugler, the Beast, that I did earlier this morning, wrote it earlier this morning for Thursday over at The Athletic. So stay locked in for that. Made a trade, got a couple extra picks, trenches early. But appreciate you guys being here and listening to another episode of the Alec Lewis Show. Enjoy the Masters this weekend if you're a golf guy. If you're not, turn it on. I mean, it's beautiful. But thank you guys for being here. We will talk to you very, very soon.